what happened here? How much of this was Iowa? How much of this was Richmond?
I thought mostly it was what Richmond did. I thought it was great coaching by Richmond because basically what they did on the defensive end was said that, Jordan Bohannon and Keegan Murray aren't going to beat us. Your other guys are going to have to beat us. You talk about Peyton Stanford and Chris Murray combined for 2 of 11. Patrick McCaffrey gets 17 shot attempts, the most shots he's taken all year long. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that throughout the course of their motion offense, Richmond left those guys open. They went under ball screens, they shortchanged some cross-screen actions, and they left those guys open. But I think really where this game really came down to was the paint. What really changed for Iowa through the course of this season was that they really started to dominate the paint against other opponents, along with their offense. But really, this game, Richmond dominated the paint. They had 38 paint points. I thought they were the more aggressive and physical team, and I thought that was the difference in the game.
Yeah, sure seemed like it. It just felt like Iowa was out of sync offensively this entire game. And to your point, Richmond had a lot to do with it. It also just felt like Iowa was a little flat. Like, for whatever reason, there just wasn't the sense of urgency that you would expect. And I mean, it's hard to tell. Like, I'm watching the game on TV. So, but that was my impression. Did you share that feeling of just kind of, it didn't feel like, I mean, you would just expect the All-American to take over the game, and Keegan Murray just didn't feel like he was inclined to do so.
I thought it was Gilliard, Richmond's point guard. He really controlled the tempo of the game. I thought there was points of the game where Iowa tried to make it a helter-skelter type of game. They tried to press a little bit. They tried to get into Richmond. But I thought Gilliard did an unbelievable job of just getting them in their sets, controlling the tempo of the game, running that Princeton offense. That Princeton offense is so draining to guard as well. That's another thing that a lot of people have to notice and talk about. When you have to guard those back screens, back cuts, guard those different actions that you're not used to seeing, I think it can kind of get you out of a rhythm mentally.
It is a little bit of a thing of beauty when it works well, and I know you played in it for a couple years, and so you know it well. And Chris Mooney obviously has the Princeton ties, and they did run it beautifully. That being said, I felt like, and maybe you disagree, I felt like kind of going into this tournament, if there would be one end of the court that would be Iowa's downfall, even though they've been better defensively, and we've talked a lot about it, that it would be the defense. I still think they defended well enough to win the game. I don't know if you agree or disagree. It just felt like it was the offensive end, which has been so great all year, which ultimately let them down.
Yeah, I mean, and I think overall, too, I think that's a big picture thing is like, Iowa comes in, they won 4 games, their legs are probably tired, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of different
Except Richmond won 4 games, too.
Right.
And Richmond had its back up against the wall. Like, Iowa didn't need to win those games.
Right.
Richmond had to win those games.
Yeah, and so there's a sense of urgency for Richmond.
Right.
They're running high on that sense of urgency. And I think Richmond didn't really get the national attention that Iowa got. Iowa was getting national attention. Everybody's talking about
And you
them.
brought this up yesterday.
Yeah, I brought it up yesterday. And so, like, when you see that, as a player, you tend to kind of relax a little bit. You might not come out with that same sense of urgency that you normally would. So, you kind of start to drink your own Kool-Aid a little bit. There's points in my career where I had a hot streak. And then, I go up against a team or a certain player, and, they come out with that hunger and that desire and that fire, and it's a little bit different. And then all of a sudden, it kind of backs you up on edge a little bit. So I think that had a little bit to do with it as well.
Yeah, it's tough because there was so much excitement over this team, as you discussed, and really a feeling that, first of all, there was very little expected of them coming into the year. And then you get to this point where all of a sudden you're a fashionable pick. I think I saw they were in 10% of the Final Fours in one of the big online bracket pools. So there's a lot expected of this team. I think if you would have said at the beginning of the year, hey, this is a team that's going to win the Big Ten tournament and be in the hunt for the Big Ten championship, be a team that's going to end up as a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, I think Iowa fans would have said, where do I sign up for that? They certainly would have signed up for having Keegan Murray as a first-team All-American, and yet here we are once again, still have been past the first weekend since 1999. So ultimately the season ends with a little bit of a disappointing taste in your mouth.
Yeah, and here's another thing I think people have to look at and consider. There's a lot of talk about Fran McCaffrey not getting to the Sweet 16. And one thing that I just wonder, does he change over the course of time, is they run that motion offense where they don't really run plays for their star player. And who knows if they have, a star player next year. Maybe Chris Murray comes back and is a star. Do they start to run more actions for their star players? Because at the end of close games, when you're running that motion offense, that democratic offense, anybody can kind of make a play. And so you might have the ball in the wrong player's hands at the end of games. So I think that's something that Fran McCaffery's going to have to take a look at.
It's too bad because this was such a positive story this year. It was one of the great stories in the Big Ten. I mean, I would say along with Wisconsin, they were the two most surprising teams, no doubt. And you just hate to see it end this way, given the extent to which I think in a lot of people's minds they overachieved. So that was the biggest surprise, no doubt, of the day. I think Michigan was surprising for the opposite reason.
Yeah.
You think about going into this game, not having Devontae Jones, who has been so good here down the stretch. I mean, they were the 11 seed. Colorado State is the 6 seed, and they're the 11 seed without one of their most important players. They found themselves down by 15 points and then totally flipped the script. The second half was really impressive. What do you take away from Michigan's win?
There's one thing that I've noticed all year long when, is a sign that Michigan is playing well, is when they're getting deflections. I have to go back to that Ohio State game where they had 4 deflections in a row for steals. They can get out in transition. I feel like Eli Brooks is an underrated transition player nationally. He's a guy that can really get out, find shooters, be able to knock down threes. I feel like when they can get out in transition and find their shooters, that is when Michigan is at their best. And that's what they were able to do. Frankie Collins did a great job of pressuring the basketball. Eli Brooks did a great job of pressuring, making them feel a little bit more uncomfortable in their offense. And then when they can get out in transition, they can find Caleb Houston, get him some threes. So I think that's when they're at their best, and that's why they won.
It did feel like they were able to push tempo there in the second half. And Colorado State didn't seem to want to play at that pace. It felt like that was much more to Michigan's liking. They shot 60% in the second half. Colorado State only had 9 field goals so in the second half. So to me, both ends of the court, I mean, Michigan really played well that last 25 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I thought they did a great job on Roddy and Stevens as well. Those guys coming in averaged almost 40 points per game combined. They only had 22 points, and they had to take 22 shots to make that happen. So I thought they made them be high-volume guys because when you look at Colorado State's roster, they don't have a lot of other guys that can make plays and make opportunities. So if you can take those 2 guys out of the game, it gives you a good chance to win.
You have fewest points for David Roddy since November.
Wow.
So, I mean, Michigan really clamped down. And you mentioned Frankie Collins.
Yeah.
The degree to which he stepped up. And when you're a freshman on this stage for the first time, I mean, it's enormous. The NCAA tournament is such a big deal. And I think guys can react in one of 2 ways. You can be overwhelmed or you can step up to the moment. Caleb Houston did that. He was really big as they started to make that run, hit a couple huge threes. But Frankie Collins, who has not been in a spot like this year, where so much was lying on, kind of resting on his shoulders. And as you said, both ends. I mean, 14 points for him. I think he missed 1 shot. He was really good.
Yeah, I mean, think about the course of the season. 13 out of the last 14 games, he was in single-digit minutes. So it's not a guy that has a lot of game repetition. So to be ready to have your number called, you know that he was in the gym working on his game, staying prepared for this moment. I mean, think about this, too. They're down 15. The game looks like it's going to be over. Frankie Collins scores 5 straight points, gets a steal, really gets this offense and their team going. Because really with Michigan, Hunter Dickinson's the best player, but Michigan is at their best when their point guards are playing well. And a lot of that is Devontae Jones over the course of the year. But I think Frankie Collins recognized that he had to be that guy in order for them to get back in the game.
What do you think about the matchup with Tennessee, one of the hottest teams in the country?
Oh, man. I watched that Tennessee game against Longwood. They probably had the best showing, I thought, of the day in terms of just on both ends of the court. Kenny Chandler is an unbelievable point guard, probably a first-round draft pick. They can beat you inside and outside. It's going to be a tough matchup. But like I said, if they can get deflections, if they can make Tennessee a little bit uncomfortable getting out in transition, I think it could be a good game.
Tennessee premised so much on its defense, and they have just been shutting teams down. They're second in the nation in defensive efficiency. So it will be a really tough matchup. But to think of where Michigan was back in late December, early January, and where they are now, speaks volumes about the job that this team has done. So this is one of those where it does feel a little bit like you're playing with house money and just kind of see how it goes. Indiana did play as well last night, and it just got ugly with St. Mary's. This was a 34-point game at one point. And Randy Bennett even said after the game he kind of felt bad for Indiana, that they were just put in almost an untenable situation, having to travel from Dayton, and you could just kind of see that their legs were shot. Is that what it was in your mind? Was there more to it? Look, St. Mary's really good, too.
Yeah. I mean, St. Mary's is playing great basketball. And when I look at St. Mary's, they play a lot like a European style of offense. When it comes to spacing, they run a ton of high ball screens for Tommy Cruz. And the funny thing is, like, I played in Europe, and, like, when you talk about spacing, that is the most important thing to a basketball game in that kind of style of play. And I think that really gave Indiana problems. Tommy Cruz coming off of those high ball screens, guys were in the exact spots they were supposed to be. He's able to hit them in the exact pockets. Indiana doesn't know whether to get the roll man or to get the shooter. So I just thought overall, just from a defensive standpoint, Indiana was just at a disadvantage. And also, too, when you're jet lagged and you have to play against a cerebral team like St. Mary's, that takes a toll on you as well. So I thought it was overall just a bad matchup. And you mentioned, the plane, I think just overall, but I think Indiana just has to be proud of the season that they had, not making the tournament 6 years.
Right, no doubt. I mean, I think, again, you kind of think of, because we're prisoners of the moment, and so in the moment, clearly you'd like to win the game. But I think if you go back to the beginning of the year and you say, as an Indiana fan, here's what's going to happen, going to make the tournament, you're going to win a game, albeit a first four game, and get yourself back in that March discussion, I think you take that. And now it's the time for Mike Woodson to build. Now he's going to have some of his own recruits. They've got Jalen Hood-Schifino coming in, who's really highly touted. So they have to feel good about the future. It's the same issues they had all year, but they made 2 threes. It's just really hard to win games when you can't make outside shots.
Yeah, and Mike Woodson alluded to it after the game. They asked him where they're going to have to improve in the offseason. He said, I would be a fool not to mention shooting, as the first thing. But I think that's a good thing. Like, if you have to work on defense or commitment or culture or those type of things going into the offseason, I think you're worried as a coach. But if it's only shooting that's your issue, I think you can get in the gym and fix that and gain the confidence. So I like really where this Indiana program is.
And guys clearly bought in. I always feel like the defensive end is the ultimate reflection of how much players have bought in, and they were the most efficient defense in the Big Ten during the course of the season. Trace Jackson-Davis kind of non-committal after the game about whether or not he might come back. Pretty interesting to think about that possibility. That definitely would change the trajectory of Indiana's season were he to do that. So, as with many teams, these next few weeks, couple months, we'll learn a lot about what to expect personnel-wise for next year. Back on Big Ten today, here's what Indiana's Xavier Johnson had to say after the Hoosiers' loss yesterday. Season full of ups and downs, did something people didn't think we could do. Proud of my brothers, the heart emoji to IU, and thank you for all of your support this year. Andy Katz was on the sideline of the game broadcast. He joins us now from Portland. And Andy, as I was talking about with Trey, it seemed to me as if Indiana just kind of ran out of gas. We mentioned the travel issues and all the games that they had to play in the lead up. They played this 5th game in 7 days, and St. Mary's hadn't played in 9 days. How much do you think all that was a factor?
So I'm going to agree with Trey a little bit here. I was wrong yesterday. I thought the wrong matchup would be if they had to play a team that was going to get up and down because of what you just said. St. Mary's was the wrong matchup because, and maybe Trey said this, maybe I didn't hear this correctly, because of the way they play. And when you get down to that St. Mary's team, and I'll be honest, I watch St. Mary's on television as I try to, as I've talked to you about, Dave, trying to survey the country. But they were much better than I ever could have seen on television in person. Tommy Kuzi is a 6-year point guard, and he sliced and diced Indiana better than anyone I've seen. The way he ran that team was a clinic. And once Indiana got down, maybe it was the legs, maybe it was disheartening that it was just so frustrating for them to get a good shot. And defensively, they were late on everything and could not stop any cuts. Mateus Toss, did a great job inside, whether it was Trace Jackson-Davis, Race Thompson. And I thought the frustration that we saw in their faces, Indiana, was as much about not being able to deal with the way St. Mary's was playing as it was potentially, legs and fatigue.
I think we can all agree the highlight of that game was when the ball got stuck up in the basket standard and the Indiana cheerleaders went up and got it. Your interview with them afterwards has to be one of the highlights of your life journalistically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at my career over the last 30 years, I've done a lot of, investigative pieces. I've interviewed the president countless times. But to me, I think really getting to the, just the crux of what it's like to be on someone's shoulders and how much I thought what Cassidy Cerny told me about the fact that she trusts Nathan Paris with her life every time he puts her up. That was the moment where I said, you know what? That's the bite I need.
Well, you got it. Intrepid reporter, no doubt. I always marvel at you, and I tell you about this all the time, because when we're in that green room watching games together, I'm so focused, right? I get so distracted and just have to focus in. You have an amazing ability to multitask. So I still feel comfortable asking you this, even though I know you spent your entire day watching the 4 games in front of you in Portland. You're still able to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what was a wild day in the NCAA tournament. And you were tweeting about the Kentucky loss to St. Peter's and how it's kind of measured up in terms of all-time upsets. What's your takeaway there? You really believe that's a bigger upset than when Virginia lost to UMBC?
So obviously it's not 16-1 versus 15-2. I get that. But I just want to take the big picture of who got upset. And that Virginia team, as good as they were that year, #1 team in the country, in that game, A, they didn't have DeAndre Hunter. He's an NBA player. He was their best defender. B, that Virginia team, the way Tony Bennett plays, allows teams to stay in games. And UMBC had at least one professional basketball player. He was playing in Europe since, not someone who's an NBA player. This St. Peter's team does not. And if anyone has been to Jersey City, St. Peter's is a few buildings. And Kentucky, like a Michigan, like Michigan or Ohio State football, that's Kentucky basketball in terms of the amenities. The salaries of former Illinois assistant Orlando Antigua is, if I'm not mistaken, 4 times what Shaheen Holloway makes as the head coach. And that is the assistant at Kentucky. And so to me, if you just look at the schools and who's on the rosters, it's a bigger upset of St. Peter's versus Kentucky.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. Here's the tweet that you sent out on that. It is remarkable. And again, we can kind of split hairs. So that Virginia team was great. They were the #1 overall seed in the tournament. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that. They hadn't lost a regulation game since December. So it will always be the biggest upset simply because it's a 16 over a 1, no doubt. But this was, and I also think the notion that it got to overtime. When it got to overtime, I kind of felt like, well, Kentucky will figure out a way now, because it just feels like the best team kind of rises in those 5 minutes, but it wasn't the case. And
and it was in Indianapolis, and as we know, anytime Kentucky plays in Indy, especially like when they played even Indiana or Louisville, any kind of game that they would play there, they bring great fan support, Big Blue Nation. And so that's what even more shocking. I mean, St. Peter's was essentially winning a de facto road game.
Let's run through today really quickly. What Big Ten team do you have the most confidence in today?
I would say Purdue. And I know someone's going to come back and say, oh, look at St. Mary's, Indiana. Well, but Purdue's better than Indiana. And Yale did not win. That's the difference. Like, Yale didn't have as good a season as a St. Mary's did by beating Gonzaga. And St. Mary's was ranked, by the way. I just don't think that Yale can pick the the issue of Purdue, which is their ability to deal with pressure. And I don't think Yale can pressure, Purdue, because that's their problem, turnovers, as we saw last Sunday. So, Yale's best player actually helped beat Rutgers. Paul Atkinson transferred from Yale to Notre Dame. So I think Purdue's in the best situation. I'll be very intrigued to see what happens with Michigan State Davidson, with Tyson Walker, because that's going to be, I think, a very close game, and similar to what happened with Richmond, Iowa, although Michigan State's not obviously the favorite. So that one intrigues me as well. Illinois, Chattanooga, Jacob Grandison, is he out? Is he playing? Does Kofi Coburn dominate in the post? Be really intrigued to see how that goes. And then I want Ohio State to basically silence me, because I'm in the chorus of thinking, oh, this is a bad matchup. Loyola Chicago, veteran team, they won the Valley tournament. Ohio State's got multiple injuries. But you know what? Loyola Chicago doesn't have E.J. Liddell. And if E.J. Liddell and Malachi Branham play to their potential, they're the best players on the floor, and they can win. So in a way, even though Ohio State is the favored seed, it doesn't feel like they're the favorite, and they can quiet all of us up by winning that game.
Well, I don't know if you saw this, but in the last hour, it was announced that Kyle Young and Zed Key are both available for the game.
All right, so you're breaking news to me, because
yes,
I've been waiting for you, so I did not.
Yeah, which is rare, right? As I said,
yes.
you're the multitasker between the two of us. So no doubt that's huge news for Ohio State. Now, whether or not they're 100% and all that, who knows? But just having those guys out there, this team has been so limited by injuries this year, and I think both of us expected Justice Suing would be a huge part of this team. He obviously hasn't been. This is the update here from Ohio State Hoops, where you see both of those guys are available. So that really encouraging news.
Oh, no question. Hey, one
Buckeyes.
other thing, Dave, that I totally blanked on, obviously, is Wisconsin. And, the Colgate game scares me for Wisconsin because of the way Colgate shoots the basketball. And I hope Johnny Davis plays to his potential, because we didn't see it last week in Indy. But look, this is going to be, and I actually said this at the beginning of the week, I think this will be the biggest home court of any site on Thursday and Friday in Milwaukee for Wisconsin. Big Red's going to show up. The question is, will that be enough? I think it will be, and hopefully Wisconsin can win these games to get to Chicago, because they would have a decided advantage potentially there as well. But they actually, to me, Dave, are maybe the most intriguing team today, because they want to share the Big Ten. When they're at their best, they can beat anyone in the country. So, let's see how they play against a team that's going to be really hard to beat.
Just have not been good down the stretch, as you know, and very favorable draw, not just Milwaukee, but as you said, Chicago. So they will have a decided home court advantage in terms of the crowd. The Big Ten crowns a tournament champ on the ice tomorrow. Number 1 seed Minnesota hosts number 2 Michigan. You can catch all the action right here on the Big Ten Network. Get things started with a half-hour pregame show at 7:30 Eastern, followed by the game at 8, and then stick around afterward. Reaction on the postgame show. It is all tomorrow here on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. It's going to be the rubber game between those two teams this year. 4 games, 2 wins apiece, separated by 2 goals and 3 total shots. Neither team's had much power play success, as you can see. Will be the 301st meeting between these two, a series that dates back 99 years. Paul Caponegri will be in the studio along with Rick Pizzo. He joins us now for a preview. These have been the 2 best teams here in the Big Ten, a 1 seed against the 2 seed. The season series, as we saw, is very certainly completely even in terms of wins. How much separates these 2 teams, in your opinion?
I mean, not a lot. I mean, you saw that on that graphic there. There isn't a lot. Both high-end skilled teams can skate. I mean, there might be up to like 20 guys between the teams that could play in the NHL.
Wow.
I mean, there's just so much, and then the speed, and they get to play on the Olympic-size arena, so people that maybe don't know that, it's a 200 by 100, so it's a wider ice surface at Mariucci. So all that speed and that skill out there is going to be on display. And it could just come down to very small things, a turnover here, a soft goal by a goaltender, those little things. Or like you said, there was one power play goal in 4 games. So one power play goal or a shorthanded goal. So there's just little things. And when you're coming down to one game, it could come down to simply one big mistake.
How much pressure do you think is on Michigan here? Minnesota won the regular season. We came into this year, and it seems like ages ago.
Yep.
But talking about Michigan and the potential to be kind of one of the great teams ever. And they have 4 of the first 5 picks in the NHL draft on their team. They have 7 first rounders. I mean, it is totally absurd how loaded this roster is, and yet they did not win the regular season in the Big Ten. How much pressure do you think is on them to win, at least get the conference tournament championship, and then heading into the NCAAs?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some pressure on them in the Big Ten. But I think ultimately it's the NCAAs, because there's such a national story that all the other teams, they've kind of got picked on, to be honest with you, all season nationally because of, I think, what they are, what you just said, what they have. So, yes, there's pressure because there's such a high expectation. And with some of those draft picks, they're not just freshmen. It's like, those guys decided to come back. Those guys left millions of dollars. They'll still get them next year. But they left a lot of money on the table to come back to do this and for this purpose, to win championships. So, yes, there's pressure. But these guys, at such a young age now, that there's such a spotlight on them that I don't know if it really, if anything, I think they're looking forward to this. You heard Brendan Brisson talk about how they were hearing that they were a soft team because they couldn't beat a tough team like Notre Dame. Well, they kind of showed up on Saturday and proved some people wrong. So I think they're a dangerous team. If they got a chip on their shoulder, I think they're more dangerous than they are, with the pressure or whatever you want to say. That
been 6 years since they won the Big Ten tournament. How much does experience in the postseason matter here? The fact that Michigan last year, as I recall, the NCAA tournament, they bowed out due to their COVID issues, whereas Minnesota has that experience. Now we're only talking about the Big Ten tournament here. We're not talking about the NCAAs, but you're just talking about guys who have played in pressure situations a little bit more for Minnesota. Is that a factor?
I think it will be a little, based on the fact they're going to be at Minnesota. There's a home ice advantage. There's going to be 10,000 people at Mariucci. The place is going to be rocking. They did play in the semifinals last year. A lot of these players for Michigan, a lot of the same players. Yeah, there were some freshmen on both sides. And Minnesota beat them at Notre Dame in an empty arena. It felt just kind of strange. I was there for the quarterfinals, and it was great to be there. But you're, in an empty, neutral site arena, a little different than Saturday is going to be at Mariucci, home ice, all that, Minnesota's going to come out with a little extra juice. But it's going to be fun. I can't wait to watch it. It's just, 2 great hockey teams, the ones you wanted to see. So I think it's going to be fun stuff on Saturday.
How would you evaluate the goalies? Justin Close has been an incredible story. We've talked about him when LaFontaine went pro. Eric Portillo's been really good between the pipes for a while here now for Michigan. What do you think in that part of the matchup?
I give the to Portillo. He's played all year. He's played every game. He goes under the radar. You talked about their 7 first-rounders, all their talent. But he's played every game for them. He's big. He's athletic. I think we've talked about that, too. 2nd-team All-League. Justin Close has been great and a great story. I kind of go back to their last game, though. They played. It was actually the last regulation loss for Minnesota back in mid-January. So that shows how long they haven't. But Minnesota outshot them 40-20 in that game. This was at Minnesota, so same scene we're going to see Saturday. But Portillo made 39 saves. And Michigan was able to win 4-1. You'd think, 4-1, they dominated the game. They did not dominate that game. Minnesota outplayed them more often, but Portillo was the story of that game. Michigan took advantage of turnovers, went down and scored, and Portillo made big saves. And so based off of that game specifically, and it was the most recent one between them, I'm giving the edge to Portillo in that his size, his strength, his experience. This is Close's first time in the playoffs in a Big Ten championship.
I think what's cool, kind of to your point, is how well both of them are playing, right? Minnesota's won 9 in a row. Michigan's won 9 of 11. Now, ultimately, and not to shortchange this game at all, because there's a conference tournament championship on the line. But you made this point with Michigan. I think it's hard to argue.
And Minnesota, frankly.
Right, yeah, you're looking towards, you're pointing to the NCAAs, right? So you've talked a lot about the pairwise rankings and kind of where these
Right.
teams stand and the importance here for NCAA tournament seeding. So Michigan has 56 points, 55 for Minnesota. Can this
Right.
one game flip it? Like if Minnesota were to win, how much does one game impact that?
So Michigan, I'll go with them because they're easier to explain. If they win, they will leap Minnesota State and become the #1 seed in the tournament.
Wow.
And that would be important because, nothing against any of the team 16 that make it, but that bottom 16 team is from the Atlantic Hockey Conference, and it's the conference champion only that makes it. None of them are in the top 20 rankings or would make it if they were an at-large. So that is where that becomes critical. For Minnesota, it becomes a lot more murky. I've heard scenarios where they could lose and still get a #1 seed. If Minnesota Duluth, who's not on that board, wins the tournament that has Western Michigan, North Dakota, and Denver in it, if they win it, Minnesota can somehow stay in a #1 seed if they lose. And also, if they win on Saturday, they could also still drop to #2 seed because of those other teams right there, Western and North Dakota. So I think obviously they want to win the game, and it's important. Minnesota, like I said, Minnesota could win and feel good, but they could still drop to a #2 seed. So it's a little weird that way. Michigan is locked in #1, win or lose, and if they win, they can get the #1 seed. I think that's the biggest thing.
What about the impact on Ohio State? Because you saw them at 15. Are they going to sneak in or are they going to be left out here?
There's a scenario, and it's not that far-fetched. There's 3 things that need to happen. They need Quinnipiac to win their conference tournament. They need Minnesota State to win theirs. Minnesota State's got to play Bemidji. It's a 1-game thing. Quinnipiac's got to win 2 games. They were the favorite they were the #1 team in their conference. They're the favorite to do so. And then the third is one that I think that's probably going to happen is the Hockey East has 4 teams left. 3 of them can win it, and it would be okay for the Buckeyes. If UConn were to win it, that would be a detriment to the Buckeyes because they would leap up and that 15th spot would be gone. So, I've heard 40% chance that all that happens. I've heard 9%. I'm like, I don't know. It makes your brain fry a little bit, but they've got a shot. It's a weird thing because if they do make it, they haven't played in a couple weeks.
Right.
But you never know. Once you get in the NCAA tournament, and that's where I think the pressure is really on, Michigan, because I think everyone sees them. How do you not win a national championship? In 5 years, when you see all those guys successful in the National Hockey League, they're going to be like, how did that team not win a national championship?
Right.
But it's hockey. It's tough. It's 1 game at a time. You saw it in basketball yesterday. Anything can happen in those.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this game tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Have fun. Thanks for all of your insights on this. Some anxious moments in Columbus is, I think, what you're describing.
Couple different ones.
A lot of different TV
This is
sets
fun,
going.
though. This is great. I love it.